Today they asked me to talk about death, and they've talked to me about death before and given me something that I talk about, and if you've come to the store and talked to me about that, you may have already seen this. We talked about the physical body likes to be at about 60 to 80 hertz. That's where its frequency is it's like the sweet spot. But if it gets too low, it starts getting diseases and colds and dis-ease and all kinds of things can happen. So we like to, suggest that you keep your frequencies up. In contrast, our soul, or the spiritual part of our being, our higher self, that's pure spirit, and that resonates at a much higher frequency. And if you're watching this video and you are interested in angels, by default, you already kind of accept that there is a spiritual part to our existence. It's not too far of a leap to know that our bodies are the vehicle for our soul or our spiritual being, or whatever you want to call it. What they've showed me, here's our body. And it's that 60 to 80 hertz. All right, so here's our body. And here's our soul, or our spiritual part of our being. And this is what animates our body. This is what's the connection to God. That's that spark of life that animates all living things. And if you've ever been in the presence of something that was dead, whether it was a dead bug or a dead animal or even a dead person, especially if it was a person that you knew or an animal that you were familiar with, like one of your pets, you know that when that spark leaves that physical body, it is very clear that whatever animated that body or that person, it isn't there anymore. And we call it a corpse. Where did it go? Or what was that magic? Okay, and there's as many explanations of that as you would like to look up. But what the angels told me was, here's the actual thing that happens with death. Okay, so we've got our body, and its frequency is pretty dense because we're walking around in a three-dimensional world here. But our spirit is very high frequency, and it has to find some common ground where this high frequency part of our body can live with this low frequency part of our physical being. This is where we exist. Okay, this is what walks us around. If we don't take care of our physical body, or some trauma happens, or some dis-ease happens, or just through aging or bad lifestyle or whatever, you start to lower your frequencies, okay? There becomes less and less room where the spirit can co-reside in a common denominator frequency and animate the physical body. And the lower the frequency gets with the physical, then the thinner and the thinner and the thinner of that common denominator space exists. Now, we all have known people, and sometimes even yourself, you're like, I don't even know how that person's still alive. Well, that's what we call the will to live. And that's when our higher self, or our soul, decides to go ahead and lower its frequencies and hang around these lower frequencies for whatever reason. Maybe they don't feel like they're done or whatever. And so the person, that animated body, still stays animated, even if it's at a very low level, but life hangs on. At some point, the higher frequency of our soul, it can't lower its frequencies any longer, or it ceases to be, I don't know. It's just not as advantageous. The cost of lowering the frequencies isn't worth the value of doing that. And so all of a sudden, the spirit part of our body, our soul, doesn't have a common denominator frequency that the physical body, that it can reside in. And when that happens, it cuts its links with the physical body, and that's what we in our dimension call death. That's the separation of the spirit. This is when the soul goes to heaven, or whatever your tradition calls it. That's when the separation occurs with the physical body. Now, sometimes, through a variety of reasons, the spirit or your soul, in some miraculous way, can re-establish a connection with that physical body, and we call that they came back from death, or they visited heaven and they came back. That does happen. You still have to have this common denominator frequency. So in the case of, let's say, a heart attack and someone dies on the table, and then the doctors, they get out their paddles and they're like, bang! And suddenly they bring the frequencies of the physical body back up to a place where there's a common area where the soul can live. Then they can reanimate that physical body, and then life can go on. When that separation occurs, and we call that death, that's where your spirit goes back to source or back to heaven or whatever your tradition calls it, in the very best scenario. Now, sometimes when there's been a trauma, you're in an accident or someone takes your life, then that spirit gets stuck. So in that case, we call them, ghosts or spirits. And sometimes they do need help to pass on. Does that answer some questions for you? When they explained it to me, it was like, oh, I personally went through the death of my sister back in December. I think I mentioned it. And I had been around death when my mother died, but I wasn't there the moment that she actually passed away. But I was there when my sister passed away. And my sister had been very sick for a very long time, and so her physical body frequencies were very low, and she was one of those people who's like, I don't even know how she's still alive. People would say, how's your sister? I'm like, she's still alive. And that was her strong will to live, with her spirit staying resident in her physical body, which I'm sad to say she did not take good care of at all. And when she hit that spot where her physical body just couldn't accommodate her spirit any longer, we went to the hospital, and I and her husband were holding her hand. And within about 20 minutes, she was kind of in a catatonic state, so she couldn't really speak, but we knew she knew that we were with her. And as she became more comfortable with what was happening, we're in the emergency room, and it's just a weird kind of a medical thing, but we were holding her hand. Don was on one side, I was on the other. And it was very, very clear when her soul separated from her physical body. I mean, we both were like, well, she's gone. And there's this medical thing that happens with your physical body. It continues to breathe one or two, or sometimes even for a little while. I can't remember what they call that. It's just this weird thing your body does. But your soul, I mean, you're technically dead. And when she passed, when that soul separated, I swear to you, I heard the angels singing. It was truly magical. And you see, I'm getting emotional about it. Not that she died. Her physical life was no longer sustainable. She wasn't a particularly religious person, but those angels were right there. And it just was such a comfort to both Don and I, because he heard them too. So it was like, wow, and I talk about this stuff all the time, but, I'm human. And so it's really wonderful to get validated that all this stuff that, you've been thinking you believe and talking about, it actually happened. And so that's what they've told me to tell you about death. And that doesn't mean that it isn't sad, or it isn't upsetting, or it isn't awful, or that losing this person or this pet, that it doesn't suck, because it does. It does suck. And you will go through your grieving. Maybe that helps just a little bit to understand from the angelic point of view what's happening to you. I hope that helps. Put some comments in the message below. Let me know if this makes any sense, if you've got other messages that they've shared with you. And then also, if you have an angelic story or a spirit guide story, I am collecting them actively now because I will be doing a book. So PM me or ask me to get in contact with you. I am really interested. So please let me know.